The Never Quit Podcast, sponsored and hosted by Quotes Jungle, with your host, Quote.
Welcome to another episode of the Never Quit Podcast. In the studio with me, I have the grateful energy of Jose. How you doing, Jose?
You know, I'm hanging in there. It's been a couple weeks.
Talk about why it's been a couple weeks.
Yeah, you know, August 5th was supposed to be an amazing, spectacular day. It was supposed to be our 15th anniversary of giving out backpacks to kids, and as we're setting up and getting prepared, I received a phone call that my nephew had been murdered in Aurora, Colorado.
Talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, you know, Curious Angel Silva was a 27-year-old black Latino man, father of two. And the circumstances surrounding it, just seemed to be very demoralizing and devastating for a family and a community in terms from a young man that didn't deserve this. You know, we are in some ways starting to get information that it could have been a setup and then that it was premeditated. And he was a young man that had no idea that this was taking place and just trying to serve and live and worked and take care of his kids. And the devastating factor of this is now we have another man who will not be able to raise his children, and we have black and brown children fatherless in this country.
Why don't you tell the people a little bit more about your nephew's story personally, because I know it's fresh to you. Yeah. Well, remember, this is a different platform, and we're trying to get people more familiar. Yeah. And you can share whatever you want to share about that incident.
Thank you for that. You know, Curious was a dynamic individual. He was an artist. He went by K-Mac. He talked about his experiences being raised in Mount Ballon and in West Denver. You know, years ago, he got with this young lady, and they started dating. They had two children. And this past May, they broke up. And so in breaking up, you know, you have your different situations and whatnot, but he kept involved with the children. They seemed to have a healthy relationship. But that Friday evening, on August 4th, my nephew was walking into the dispensary on Yale and Broadway. As he's walking out, she's walking in with her new dude. This individual, I guess, a couple of years ago, jumped another one of my nephews and took his chain. My nephew got it back, a different nephew, and so they hadn't seen this guy in 2 years. And so my nephew comes back out of the dispensary, and this dude pulls out a gun and a strap just right on my nephew right away and starts menacing him, talking shit to him. The security guards come out. The dude and my nephew's baby's mom takes. And I don't even like saying baby's mom because I respected this individual. You know, this person was in your life, right? And so him and Monet, David Kenny and Monet take off. And my nephew then goes back home that evening, and he's with my mom and my other nephews and family members, and they're hanging out doing what they do on a Friday night, what young people do on a Friday night. He's texting her, and he ends up going home at like 12:30. And between 12:30 and 1:30, it's a little sketchy in terms of what happened. But he was already home. And so somehow he was, he was somehow brought out of his home and ended up on 30th and Peoria in a situation where his life was taken.
So I've been following you on your page publicly. Why don't you tell the people how you feel about how this incident was handled?
Oh, bro, the Aurora Police Department fucking failed us. That's the truth, right? And the fact that another person is dead at the hands of this suspect in Atlanta, Georgia, a week later, only speaks to that and the inadequacies of the Aurora Police Department in the beginning, right? They've tried to make it right with us, but I keep telling people, we keep asking questions. We're asking the questions like, what are the circumstances? Who's the suspect? Are you following the suspect? We knew the suspect was headed to Atlanta. They're giving us different information. Oh, we're watching the suspect. We want it to be safe. We want the cops to be safe. When we go in there, we're afraid that he's going to shoot somebody. Over and over and over, so much so that me and one of the detectives got into an argument. And he's like, it sounds like you're trying to tell me how to do my job. And I said, no, I'm asking for clarity. And if clarity means I'm telling you how to do your job, it's because I know what I'm talking about. I'm an expert witness in murder trials in the state of Colorado. I know what I'm talking about. I read dispositions. I look at evidence. I have to determine factors in these cases. And it bothered him. And so then that's when we went public, not knowing that somebody had already been killed. And we went public with our issues and our concerns around the Aurora Police Department, and they sent a letter saying, we send our condolences. Well, what about the condolences of the young man that is now dead in Atlanta? So we come to find out when we get the phone call on last Friday, we get the phone call from the chief, and the chief calls and chest is probably all puffed out. Let me call the family, and we did a great job. We arrested this individual. They didn't tell us that how and the circumstances. So then I started investigating. Let me look up this individual, Fulton County, see other charges. what are these charges? Murder? Aggravated robbery? Like, wait, like, so then I start looking up the news. What took place in Atlanta on these days? A 22-year-old kid shot for a dog. What? So we start putting this together. I call Aurora and they're like, yeah, that's the circumstances. But you weren't going to tell us? Nobody was going to tell us that this is what took place and what happened? So then they say, well, the FBI fugitive unit was on him. They were watching him, but they must have been off on Sunday. Who the fuck takes Sunday off when you're looking for a fugitive who has numerous charges and crimes across this country, and you know he just committed a murder? And so my anger is not even just so much more for my own family, but for another black man that lost his life at the hands of another black man for no reason. Like, we have to fucking stop doing this. Like, there has to be something why we stop doing this. It's beyond me at this point.
What do you feel like the police department could have did better? Was he ever caught? Was he released? Tell the people the circumstances.
No, the suspect was identified about 7 hours later, so we had a name. They then also informed us that they believed he was headed to Atlanta. Why aren't you putting an APB out on, like on every car driving? Why aren't you looking at him? You know he has contacts there, homes, 10 different, all these different things. There was just never no answer. They said once he left the state of Colorado that it goes into the FBI Fugitive Task Force. Why didn't you call the U.S. Marshals? This is what they handle. They handle criminals. Violent criminals intense and apprehending them. So why not go and utilize all the resources that you had? Truly, I believe that Aurora Police Department just didn't give a damn in the beginning, that it was a black man that killed another black man in their mind. But they didn't know that there was Dr. Silva's nephew and that I was going to advocate for my family. And it's unfortunate because not everybody has me. And not everyone's probably not going to get the same support or resources that they need. And that's the piece that bothers me.
Talk to the people publicly why you became the spokesman for your nephew, besides it being your nephew, because in the public eye, people may not be familiar. You're used to that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I'm a residual victim of the summer of violence in 1993. My best friend was 12 years old and I was 14, and he was gunned down standing right next to me. His older brother was involved in some situations. They came back to retaliate, and I just happened to be with my boy, Wesley. And when they put the gun to my chest and then moved it from my chest to Wesley's and fired one shot, April 9th of 94, my life changed forever. I was an 8th grader in Richel Middle School, all of a sudden thrust into a murder, right? And I didn't know what to do at that point in time. And so as soon as the situation started to evolve, I realized that I had to fight and stand up for my community. I had to become an advocate and find solutions to why us kids in the Sun Valleys and North Lincolns and in East Park Hill and East Denver were killing each other and dying. And so I've been fighting for this for 29 years. Started a foundation, led nonprofits, raised $50 million, sent thousands of kids to college. And yet my nephew still dies from gun violence in this city that I've given my life to.
That has to hurt. My condolences. I know I've said this over and over and over, and you heard this several times, so I don't want to keep saying that to you. You said you grew up in Colorado. Can you explain what your environment was growing up?
I'm a Blaxican. I'm Black Latino. Grew up in Montbello in West Denver. My father was murdered. So I grew up with my mom, who was a lesbian and gay, and I found her girlfriend dead of a drug overdose when I was 4. We moved back and forth between Montbello and the North Lincoln projects and the Sun Valley projects, and going to John M. S. Part of the school year, or Fairview part of the school year. Very transient, a lot of alcoholism and drug abuse in the home. It was just not a place in which a kid in any environment or circumstance should grow up, and definitely was headed on the track which people say all your friends end up dead or in jail. And so, as a kid, then I was probably like 5th grade, 6th grade, left to California. My Nina was in the Navy, and that's when I really saw that there was more in the world. Like there's beaches and oceans and like there's opportunity. And so I came back, and when I was living in the North Lincoln projects, my homies used to say I was whitewashed because I would think a lot. And I was like, no, I just think a lot. Like, I think before every action, I think before every choice. There was just something that I saw differently and wanted in terms of what was in front of me. And so, I was this kid after the murder of Wesley who was homeless all through high school, but just navigated, working, trying to, living with a friend, my friend's parents, I have so many friends' parents I need to thank in life, but they would let me sleep on their couch or provided me a room all through high school that enabled me to be able to make it. But I was just a kid that was just trying to survive.
What's your personal opinion about gun violence? Where do you think it starts?
There's a couple of components of it, a few components. One is the epigenetic trauma that's coursed in our DNA. And so because of those components and pieces, we struggle with the understanding and acceptance of how to deal with our mental wellness and mental health. Like I've watched your journey over the years, how you've just taken on your health and how that has just become a huge component of who you are, an advocate. Though that is you addressing the epigenetic trauma of how we've engaged in our body and in our health. We don't have those skills or techniques a lot of times in our communities because of what we're fed or what's in our community. So that's a component. The second piece of that is the socio-situation environments, the environments in which we're raised in, we grew up in, the struggle just to try and survive and to live. The third component of that then is the destruction and failure of our institutional systems that are supposed to stand in the gap and provide services. And so you put those three things together, and that then is your firebox for all of the reasons why then gun violence is able to be perpetrated in such a way.
What do you think will make the difference? I know that's a very broad question on that, but what's your personal opinion on that?
You know, I'm able to look back, and I've been thinking about this because as we get ready for this Tuesday, I think about in 1994 where so many people stepped up and was like, we got to save our kids, right? We ended up with the Safe City Youth Summit office. We ended up with Just Say No. We ended up with so many programs coming out of East Denver and West Denver and Youth Biz and The Spot. And so all of a sudden we had these social situation guards. You know, Save Our Youth was founded and I was provided a mentor. And so all of a sudden I had, you know, this white mentor who showed up in a 64 Superstore Impala like, okay, you might be cool. But we had these resources and these supports that weren't going to allow us to fall. You know, that lasted through 94, through 2002, 2004 with Tony Grampus and a lot of this funding. And we thought we got it right. And then that went away. And now we're back 30 years later in the same situation. And so part of it is an economic investment, but not just financially, but what does that look like sustainably? Like how do we curb homelessness along with gun violence? How do we support whatever the family nucleus looks like today? How do we support those individuals in family self-sufficiency, right? I often think about growing up in the hood, it is so much harder to be poor than it is to not want to be, but the systems are set up against you that you're 20 feet behind and you just don't have the energy to do it. Well, let's like remove that line and give opportunities to individuals to do it. I think about myself and a lot of people in my group that had these services. Not everyone's a doctor, not everyone went to college, but everyone became a good citizen.
What keeps you sane? You've been through a lot in life. At this moment right now in life, at least.
I golf, and so golf is a humbling ass sport. Part of it is my wife and my structure that I've created and the peace in which I've created for myself. You know, oftentimes I used to look at like my peace has me being selfish. And it's not, right? We have to do that for ourselves. We have to create space and place. And if it's your home, if it's the things you do, the environment, the people you cut off, the people that you push away are maybe not as close. We have to do those things for yourself. So I created peace for myself. Mental wellness therapy is amazing. That was a huge part that enabled me to deal with some of my trauma. But the other piece is knowing that I have a safe place to go every night. And that's my peace. And I've created my home has that sense of peace. And then, bro, I like to sit on the beach. And so I like to go from a caramel colored nigga to, you know, chocolate M&M once in a while. So I sit on the beach.
How important is faith and prayer to you?
Yeah, it's everything. I grew up like most people drinking. You know, it's part of what you do in your life. And turned 30, and I didn't realize that, like, damn, maybe I'm an alcoholic. And so I quit drinking. And then during that time, I also re-engaged with my spirituality and my faith. You know, we grew up in church and there's all kinds of PTSD if you grew up as a Pentecostal, as a Baptist, or a Catholic, and you walk away usually when you're 18. But when I was 31, it was this re-engaging of how I looked at my faith in a different way. I started really just focusing on who I was, the mental aspect of who I was, breaking down the Bible for what I believed it was instead of looking at the nuances of like, we know we're sinners. I could give a damn about that. What does the Bible say about hope and about faith, about tenacity, about giving up, about not having vengeance? And so through that, then I ended up going to seminary, and that journey of being able to journey with 30 other leaders around this country, fellowshipping, understanding, has led me to now leading a Sunday prayer, live prayer and conversation with 200 plus people a week that will never go into church, but they'll spend 15 minutes there. And so faith has changed everything for me in terms of my relationship with God, but most importantly, my intrinsic relationship with how faith determines who I am every day.
Have you ever thought about what gave you the motivation to be the speaker and the pusher and the motivator that you are today? What as a kid instilled that in you, or what experience instilled that into you?
That's a great question. My mom says I'm an alien because I'm not like anybody else in my family. But I would say it was just the experiences that I endured, not knowing that those experiences were setting me up for something in my life. You know, finding my godmother dead a few days before my 5th birthday, I didn't realize or never understood what that would do to me in my life, or how that impacted my life in terms of somebody that was empathetic or somebody that became an advocate. I just knew that there was things wrong in this world, and I wanted to speak up for that. And I don't know why I continue to speak up. Sometimes it's painful, but I feel like if I don't, then I'm not living up to the greater good calling that I've been asked to do.
When you're doing a lot of things, I'm pretty sure you've given up. What is an experience of something that you've done and you wish you didn't give up?
That's a great question. So when in my early 20s, I decided I didn't want to be a poster child anymore. And I wasn't going to be somebody's poster child. And in giving that up, there were a lot of relationships that you give up. And in that moment, in that time a few years ago, I thought about like, what did I lose? But now in that place today, I think about like, what did I gain? And so I'm okay with that kind of decision then.
For those who aren't familiar, you ran for city council at one point, didn't you?
Yes,
Why don't
I
you
did.
talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so running for city council in 2015, it was important because it was about trying to stand in the gap and against the institutions, but most importantly, bring a voice to those like myself and others. And they spent $1 million to beat me, and so when you have people that spend that kind of money to beat you, it means you have something right and something to offer. And so I look back at that experience as someone who raised $10,000 and we got nearly 20,000 votes.
What would you do different in that experience that you didn't do?
I think differently, I would look at how we communicated what we were able to do and what we wanted to do, because I think sometimes that can get lost in the translation. Some people see me just as an advocate or as someone who's a social justice warrior. But at that point in time, I think there were other things that we could have focused on in terms of the education background, the social aspect of that background.
Who were the people growing up when you were a child that did things for you that you're trying to be a representative of, if not better?
Oh, my Nino, Philip Frank folks, STG, Sonar First Class, United States Navy, was my mentor, was my leader, was everything. He was the person that graduated high school that I saw when I was 4, who took me to California when I was 5, took me out there when I was 9, let me live with him in 6th and 7th grade, but showed me what it meant to be a man, showed me what it meant to be an individual of strong character and of integrity, but also someone that was agile and someone that was able to be listened to and also think about their own decisions and choices. I say that because in 2000, no, it would have been like 1994, Clinton was running for office, and my Nino in the Navy, most people in the Navy are Republicans at that time. And I was like, I'm supporting Bill Clinton. And the night that Bill Clinton the election was going on, my Nino played semi-professional football, and I kept running in and out of the Boys and Girls Club there in San Diego. And Clinton ended up winning, and I was able to convince my Nino to end up supporting Bill Clinton. And I think that was a powerful moment for me because I was able to show him through my own education and advocating, and I'll never forget that moment.
I'm going to rewind a little bit. So you said you ran for city council. Had you won, you think you would have needed way more money, correct?
Yeah, it takes a lot of money to run races in this city. People seem to come up with millions of dollars to run for office nowadays. I don't know where that comes from.
Okay, let's say you had the money and you won.
Yeah.
And you gain that power, which you say you get power, correct?
Oh, of course, your legislative power.
Once you gain that power, what would you have done?
Oh, immediately I would have looked at some of the socio pieces in terms of the platform that I talked about. One was mental health around youth violence and prevention. That was a huge component of the platform in 2015. And I think if we would have made some of those economic investments then, we would be in a different place. When we think about the housing and financial empowerment, we ended up having COVID, right? Think about where we could have been 4 years in advance if we would have made some of those decisions. I think about some of the decisions that we're making now in housing that Robin Knich put forward. Those were my platform issues. And so those individuals ran my platform after that and over the next 4 years. So we would have really focused on those components and those pieces, but then also economic density for the far Northeast and the marginalized communities. There hasn't been an economic investment. We're still talking about grocery stores in Holly Park. 30 years later, like how difficult is it to make an economic investment? Right? We don't do these things. Montbello, MOC's building their own grocery store. Where's our city at, right? These are pieces we were talking about that isn't happening. And so our community members, I would still continue to empower them like they're empowering themselves. But part of it, I think, is if I would have won, the immediate legislative components I would have been fiscal accountability to our community and to our residents.
Respectfully, is there anybody empowered right now that's doing somewhat okay that you like?
This new council, they're new. And I know a lot of these individuals, right? So I've watched some of the work that they've done. I've watched how they've navigated. The jury's still out. The jury is still out. Stacey Gilmore is doing some amazing work. I will give Stacey Gilmore some work and props, especially in District 11. She's been a stalwart and an advocate for us. Kevin Flynn is doing some amazing work in Southwest Denver. I do want to give Michael Hancock his due, although, I think there were some things in the last part of the administration that they just lost energy, and you can't lose energy, even after 12 years. You gotta go all the way through 100% till the end of the day. And I know, there was a lot of complexities and whatnot, but still those components. The rest, I think the jury's out, right? I think this new council can do some great things, but the jury is out.
What do you think the quickest fix to gun violence is like right now?
Yeah. Parents getting involved in your fucking kids' lives, going to their bedrooms, checking under their beds, checking their closets, checking their damn phones, going to school, having conversations with their teachers, asking your kids the right questions, having dinner with your kids. Those are the components. We've lost that component. If you're an auntie, uncle, tia, abuelita, whatever it might be, if you have kids in your homes, you are responsible for that child. Telemundo interviewed me a week ago, and I said to them, start charging all parents if their kids are under 18 and they kill somebody. That's the far-fetched, right? And I don't believe that. But that's the frustration that I have today. Like, I don't believe that the criminal justice system should be the fix. But what else do we have today? And so if that's the spectrum, then what's right in front of that? That's where we need to be. That's where we need to be. And I think parents, you need to take some responsibility for your kids. Your aunties and uncles, take responsibility for your nieces and nephews. You should know what the hell is going on in their life. You should know who they're with. If kids are coming to your house, ask the right questions. I look at a number of young people that just recently graduated, died because their friends were playing with guns and a gun was passed over and someone was shot. And you think about this and you're like, so you're in a house, you got your kids as homies in this house, and you're not aware of what's going on in there? It just befuddles me.
Where do you think the kids get the guns from?
My wife is like, I think it's like the crack epidemic. They just dropped them in the city. But look, part of it is the ability to order them online, the ghost guns. That is a huge piece of it. Another component of it is they're just being trafficked in. My wife works at a local high school, and one of her students said, all my friends have guns. I was 17, 18, and all my friends didn't have guns. And I just don't know where this is coming from. And we can't say, they're coming from beyond the border. These are coming from within the United States. There's 300 million guns in a country of 200 million people.
In your personal experience, when did you notice the tragic difference in gun violence?
I would say 2014, 2015. The generation of people my age and younger people started to shift. And you started to see 14 and 15 and 16-year-olds killing each other. You started to see 12-year-olds committing heinous crimes. And so you think about these kids then being born in the 2010 generation, 2005 to 2010. There was a lot of things going on during that time. We had the housing collapse. We had the economic downfall. And so the socio-situation complexities that arose while they were born and the trauma then is now manifesting in ways that they don't know how to deal with their anger or their issues because even their parents weren't trained or coached with that.
What do you think the police can do better? I know that's a super broad question and very sensitive question, respectfully, especially with your incident that just happened. But from being a child and knowing it's going on years and years and years, what can they do better? Because respectfully, they'll say they're understaffed now. I know that in my personal experiences. And that's a lot of jobs and a lot of things going on right now. So what's your opinion on that?
I've led a lot of organizations that were understaffed, and I still had outcomes and expectations that I had to obtain to. And so to me, that is just a fall-fest excuse and an easy excuse of bureaucracy. And so let's remove that excuse and let's actually say, then what are you doing underneath that? What relationships are you building? What CROs, the community resource officers, what are they doing? Are they intrinsically going into these communities, and do they know what is happening in these communities? Our police officers no longer live in our communities. They're no longer a part of these communities. And so immediately it's relationship building. One is getting, when Hancock first got elected, I put out this crazy ass idea. I said, why don't we offer any officer that's been an officer for 25 years, a year worth of salary and retirement? And it could be a scale. You did 30 years, you get this much or whatever. But in order to change an environment, you have to change the culture and you have to remove the sepsis and the cancer. And so if you have a force of 1,800 individuals and 1,300 of those individuals have 20 plus years and there's been a culture, how do you expect to change a culture when the cancer still is present? And so you have to think outside the box of how to get new recruits in. This whole piece of 7 years of no use of marijuana or no use. Really? Like I'm a pastor who smokes weed and have been successful and got my PhD high. And like those things don't impact you, right? In certain ways. And so we have to look at how do these social pieces impact our communities and what are some of those barriers to allowing individuals into some of those spaces.
So you believe it starts at home, correct?
Starts at home.
The police can do better.
Police have to do better.
What can people do individually themselves now?
So part of that is standing up and thinking about solutions. And solutions today starts with what can we each individually do? And part of that is one, saying, okay, this is where it ends. We have to say, where is that end marker, right? If we continue to be conditioned by what is taking place around gun violence, there's never an end marker. We have to say today's the end marker. Okay, from that, then what are the things that we need? We know we need socio-situation support for our students. We know that we need social situation support and a better educational school system. So then that means having people advocate and run for office in the school board right now. We have people running. Let's ensure that we get the right individuals in there. So when organizations are coming to the Denver Public Schools, like the Colored Association for Infant Mental Health, and they're offering training for all of the staff, and DPS doesn't respond to them, if we have the right people in, then we can ensure that the right supports are being brought to the students, right? That's one piece there. The other piece is for families to say no more. What does faith component look like that? What is the faith responsibility? How do churches get involved? And then Mayor Johnston in Denver and all mayors across the region have to say, just like we want to end homelessness, that gun violence is a public health crisis. We have to name it, do an emergency a declaration, and put funds towards that immediately.
Respectfully, maybe in your opinion, everybody's failed. Can you name a few people that were in power that made even a little change or a lot of change?
Yeah, I think back to we had an opportunity to go to Washington, D.C. in 2011, 2012, and you had Gabby Giffords and Senator Schumer and individuals really trying to push some of this gun legislation. And some of it made a difference, but then you also have just the cultural wars. They're not allowing that to happen. But here in Denver, Tom Sullivan has been a major champion of some amazing work and ensuring that some of that legislation gets across. I think about Beth McCann, who's been doing some good work and ensuring that. But then a number of nonprofits. You got Struggle of Love and Joel doing amazing work. You have Lifeline and them doing amazing work. Joe Aragon, right? But you have Johnny over at Grasp. But it's all of us, people of color, asking for the scraps that they're giving us to be able to go and produce all of this work. Could you imagine the impact if there was actually an intrinsic investment so that these organizations can not just beef up the work that they do, but the supports that they provide and serve?
Respectfully, you subscribe to color coding. You said that you are Black and Mexican, correct?
Correct.
And brown. So respectfully, some people will consider me labeled Black as well. If some subscribe to color coding, they would say we're people or our people. What is the problem that our people can't do consistently to stay together?
It was designed for us not to be together, right? It was intrinsic. And so we have to understand that first and foremost and realize that we're in this together. Collectively has a unit we are much stronger than we are divided, but it has been set up, the systems have been set up that way, where they pit each other against each other, nonprofits against each other, political powers against each other, race. You know, I grew up as a Black Latino, but in the Denver in the 80s, the blacks were on one side, the Latinos were on one side, and you had some coalition, but not a whole lot of coalition. And then we have to name it the Black-Brown Coalition. It's because, like, intrinsically this has been there, but, like, we're our people. We're one people. But it's been designed that way, and so we have to decide when are those barriers going to be broke. And for a lot of us that are mixed race or those that have been in this fight, it was always we had to choose one side or the other. So in college, I was a Mechista because there was no African-American groups at Metro. And so finally when at 22, I'm like, I'm a black man. I'm a black man as well. Like, I'm not just a Latino man. And so we have to allow individuals to be prideful who they are, but then understand that we're united, we're a unit. And if we're not a unit, then they're winning. This is why we've not made the progress that we've needed to make or that we should have made at this point in time.
This is a deep question. I ask people, when was the first time that you identified as a color that would be considered your labeled race?
In totality, 22.
22 meaning?
22 years old.
Okay, can you explain that story?
My father wasn't in my life, and so you grow up, and I had some family members, you know, I had my Black and Latino side, but I primarily grew up with my Latino side. My mom looks like your straight cone Chicana from the east side, wavy hair. But I was like this black kid with an afro who had a tail, so just much different, right? But I was Joseph Silva, and then when Wesley got murdered, my name was all over the newspaper, and I started going by Jose. And so Jose allowed me to have an identity of myself, but then it also cut out a piece of who I was, not on purpose, but of trying to survive. And so the society put me in a place of like, how do I survive in a world where I don't have an identity, where my mom and my family are all these things? How do I make that happen? And so being Jose enabled me to be able to survive and have an identity. But then when I was 22 and traveling the world and doing work, I was like, I had moved to Oakland, and I lived in Oakland for 2 years. And I was like, I'm a black guy. Like, you know, you're working in Oakland and West Oakland, where Too Short went to school. And I had some of my students were like, but you're also black too. And I was like, I am black. I'm Latino and black. And so you start having these realizations of how people see you, how you maybe not have seen yourself. And that's when that moment happened for me. And even for some in the Latino community, when I started supporting like black candidates, they were angry with me because I was the Latino leader who had been supporting all kinds of work. And when I supported Hancock, people lost their shit.
Can you recall your first experience with police?
Yeah, I was first experience, 5th grade, Sun Valley, North Lincoln Projects. We were at the Tivoli, and somebody pulled the fire alarm. And there was a bunch of kids, and we took off running. And the North Lincoln Projects were across the street from our area. I was a speedster. I was a track star. A commotion had happened, and we were out, and I was way ahead of everybody. And I turned back to go get my homies, and all the cops came up on us, and they charged everybody like with pulling a fire alarm, right? And they were manhandling us, and I was like, we didn't do anything wrong. You know, we're just in this situation. And I remember having to go to courtroom 191J. What was the judge's name? She was evil. What was her name? Everybody had her. I can't remember her name. Sidabaka? Judge Sidabaka. And you know, we had to write a letter. We had to do all these pieces. But immediately I felt like that was the first instance where I knew that choices were going to dictate what was going to happen.
Did you ever have any positive experience with police?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I talked about this recently. In 1993, they had a program where they brought the police into the North Lincoln Projects, and they were the CROs, and they had foot soldiers. And so they took us kids, Virginia Quinones, Officer Virginia Quinones, now Virginia Carter, Glenn Lopez, took a bunch of his kids to Meeker, and we spent a week up camping with cops and riding horses. And the Rocky Mountain News did this big spread about us. And that was like where I was able to see officers as individuals. And then when we lived in the projects, the CROs, the community resource officers that worked in the storefront, built relationships with us. So they would be our coaches. They would coach some of our sports. We'd compete against them. So I had a lot of positive interactions with them, but then also a lot of negative interactions with the ones that didn't know us.
This is a sideball question and a snowball, just to switch it up a little bit. What is an experience in your life where you made a decision that you wish you would have made a different decision that you feel could have dictated a different place you are in your life now?
I got into, I barely graduated high school with a 1.86 GPA. I took 100 credits my senior year, and I applied to colleges all around the country, and I got into UNM, the University of New Mexico. I was going to go run track. But then I thought about if I went to New Mexico, and where would I come during Thanksgiving break or Christmas break? Where would I live? Where would I sleep? Where would I be? And so instead, I took the scholarship to Metro State and the financial aid money where I was able to get an apartment here in town and have my own place. And so I often wonder, what would have happened if I would have went to UNM?
What do you feel one of your biggest failures is in life thus far, if you don't mind sharing?
Geez, that's a great question. I have a lot of failures. I think anybody that is true to themselves sees themselves as a lot of failures. But I would say one of the biggest pieces for me was in 2008, I got a DUI. And that was a pivotal moment in my life. It's at my birthday party, and I walk outside to go to the car to smoke a blunt. And State Patrol happens to pull in, and they see me walk into the car. I was standing outside the car, but in their mind, I was going to drive, and I had to fight. I fought it for 3 years, right? But that experience, again, reminded me about decisions, but it was also, I think I was also manifesting and hiding the anger and the hurt of losing my Nino 2 years before that. And so that experience really helped dictate and shape the rest of my life over the last 16 years.
Everything that you've experienced thus far, where do you see yourself 10 years from now? I
used to want to be the president of the United States, but I'm good with that at this point. But I really see myself as a leader in the nonprofit executive world, either leading a global national nonprofit that's supporting and servicing families and kids and children. I'm considering running for Diana DeGette's seat. Diana DeGette has been an amazing representative for us, but Denver looks much different than it did 28 years ago when she was elected. And so that's a possibility as well as casting a bid for the congressional seat. But truly for me, it's just about continuing to make a difference in the community and standing in the gap, and trying to make sure that my life is something worth living.
Do you run any nonprofit organizations right now? If you do, share those and speak with what those do.
Yeah, thank you so much for that opportunity. So we have the Silva Family Foundation. And the Silva Family Foundation I created out of the need to be able to do something sustainable for our community. And so in 2007, we had the Spring and the Summer Youth Festival, where it was like a mini Cinco de Mayo or People's Festival for the kids, where they were able to get resources and nonprofit organizations and just a big event for them. But from that, I realized we needed to do something more sustainable. And so we launched our school supply drive and backpack giveaway. And this past August 5th, we gave away 2,600 backpacks, which helped us hit our 30,000th backpack that we gave away. We gave away 3 scholarships, as well as we support families during Christmas time, and we support about 10 different families. So that's one of the major pieces that I do. And then I sit on a number of different nonprofit boards and organizations. But this Tuesday, the Silva Family Foundation is hosting the community vigil to stand against and end the gun violence, and it will be at the Denver City Hall Tuesday, 6 p.m.
Tell people how they can find out more information about your nonprofit.
Yep, you can definitely search us up at the Silva Family Foundation on all of the social media sites. All of the information is there. Our Facebook really is the one that is up to date, that has everything that's going on, especially a lot of the press releases and events that are taking place as we start to engage in this conversation. So that's one of the main places you can find us. You can Google me, Dr. Jose Silva Denver.
Talk about who Jose was at 19 years old and who you are now. What would you tell him as the man you are now, that 19-year-old person at 19 years old?
Yeah, bro, I was a fuckboy at 19. I'm just being honest with you. I was a 19-year-old kid who was in college, who thought he was the shit, who, literally, I look back and it was amazing. I had amazing friends, great opportunities. We were traveling, doing things. I always had direction, but I didn't have the belief. And the person that I am today is I have the belief. I know that it's possible. And so what I would tell myself at 19 is that hard work does pay off. It's cliche, but it does. And it's not on my time, right? It's not on my time. The things that I have today is because of the manifestation of that work, of me showing up, of me taking risks, of me taking chances, of me holding people accountable. But I would say that, I continue to be, this kid that traveled, moved around until I was about 30. And I probably would have told myself, get it together a little before you're 30.
Okay, so respectfully, you told me you're a pastor that smokes weed.
Yeah.
Will you briefly talk about your beliefs and your understanding and why you feel that's okay?
Yeah. Evangelicals drink every day, but but as the Bible says to us, right? Everything is in moderation, but those components and those pieces. And so for me, marijuana is a sense and a place for me to be able to create a space of meditation and of connection. It's also a place for me to disengage and to be able to re-engage with my faith and the wording, and then also to think about how best to inspire and aspire in the world. And so as I think about like my Sunday live prayer and conversations, it's not about like, what does the Bible say about us being sinners? We could talk about that all day. It's what does the Bible say about who we are to be better people? And so for me, I'm also a cussing pastor, if you haven't heard on here, and so I own those things, right? And so God and I will deal with those when I cross those gates. But for me, it's I choose not to. Alcohol is not the thing that I choose to do or to choose to engage in, but marijuana allows me to be able to have that sense of place and space, a space and peace, but once also a place of meditation.
When you were growing up, was there anybody that you knew personally that was affected by the marijuana laws? Because we know a lot has changed now.
I have tons of homies that were arrested, that 21 years old carrying an ounce of bud that got to felony, that is an amazing father, amazing man, does amazing stuff, but that shit sits with them, right? And they're still struggling to this day because any job they go to, they had a friend of mine had to leave his job of 15 years because he can no longer do background checks for guns because of that felony, right? And so there has to be some type of retribution and restoration for those individuals now that the laws have started to change.
In a perfect world, what is a fix with the way that society and everything is going on with all the dividing and division, in your opinion?
You know, people just need to wake the fuck up and have some common sense. Like literally, we are choosing to create our own truths. And that is, we don't realize how powerfully negative that can be. And I use that people like to create their own truths because it fits who they want or need to be, rather than who we all need and should and want to be for each other. And I think if we stopped creating our own truths, use some fucking common sense, and accept the fact that like we live in a racist, violent world. And how do we move forward from that?
Where do you think racism started?
It goes all the way back, to the Eurocentric times. We could talk about those pieces. We could talk about the institutional components of those pieces. But I think the manifestation of racism and to the level that it's at today has really started when you think about affirmative action and you had a number of Black and Latinos going and becoming educated and moving into the middle class society. You started to see how that has grown and broached out to other Black and Latinos that are becoming millionaires or successful individuals in the spaces that they're doing. And that becomes a threat. That becomes a threat to the Eurocentric model of those individuals that believe that they've had power and structural power. And so then when that becomes a threat, you use devices and mechanisms to be able to shroud those people down. Back in the day, we'd call that slavery, segregation, busing, right? Roe versus Wade. Now it's the divisiveness of legislation to oppress individuals.
Correct. What's something that you've never shared publicly that you want to give me an exclusive of that you can share on this platform?
I love it. What is something that let's see here, on the platform that I've never shared publicly. Let's see. I used to be a big raver.
Okay, talk about that.
I used to we were big ravers. We raved all over the country. I was a big dancer, but we and my homies, we raved at Candyland in high schools in Poudre Valley and Mishawaka. And so, yeah, I used to be a big time raver.
Who are some of your favorite hip hop artists?
Yeah, so Biggie Smalls, Juicy, that's my theme song. Like if you ever listen to that song, that's my theme song. I come out to that. That resonates with me. Tupac, Mobb Deep. I was a 3-6 Mafia kid, like as a kid growing up. Wu-Tang. But then, I also loved, because my mom and the people she was around, and so loved a lot of Lionel Richie. Culture Club back in the day. And then something you may not know, but I used to work with like Def Child Productions, and so we were the first group to bring Tech 9 to Denver back at Ogden Theater back in the day.
That's what's up. Tell me about that lifestyle.
Yeah.
Share one of your experience and stories as that person.
Oh man, that was dope. I used to throw concerts and promote. I was a promoter. I had my own club nights here in Denver, Thirsty Thursdays, $5 to get in, $1 you call it. We threw concerts and shows. We used to promote, and that was just an amazing time. I tell people, like I was able to throw a show in San Francisco for Thanksgiving, and we went to a dope-ass rave out there as well during that time. But to be able to do some of those things, right? To bring and work with these artists and host shows, to be able to host these shows, do events. I'm not a lyricist. I can't flow for shit, but I can host and I can organize. And so I was the businessman. I was like, let's organize, let's put together, let's market. And that was an amazing time. Like I look back and I'm thankful that I had those 10 years and those experiences, because it opened my eyes to a lot of things, and it gave me a lot of good relationships.
Earlier in the story, you said when you were younger, you were really fast. Who were some of your favorite track stars, if you remember them?
Yeah. Johnson was one. As I think back, I ran for the Alexander Lightning Express, and so Alex from San Diego was an amazing individual. But those would be some of the individuals for me when I was running.
Before we end this interview, I want to ask you, what's your expectations and hope of society?
For me, it's about accountability, right? If we all can start to be and create a sense of personal accountability for ourselves, how we engage with one another, how we lean on one another, the empathy that we have for each other, but also humility, right? Humility has been lost in a space and place in which we feel like we have to compete. Yes, it's a world of competition, but it should also be a world of love and hope, a world of direction and vision. And so my hope is that all of us collectively together to say, you know what, this has to stop now, whatever it is, if it's the mental health components, if it's the homelessness, but most importantly, there's gun violence. I officiate a lot of funerals and officiate a lot of weddings. But when you have to then go and help lead your own nephew's funeral, after you've had this journey and you ended up in this space, it hits you a little different. It stings you in a way that I didn't expect or think I would ever feel. And I don't want others to have to feel that.
Thank you for your time. Why don't you tell the people one more time where they can reach you directly?
You can reach out to me, Dr. Jose Silva. You can find me on Facebook. You can find me at the Silva Family Foundation on our website. Or you can also join us on Tuesday, August 29th at 6 p.m. at the City and County Building on the front steps.
For your time, this has been another episode of the Never Quit Podcast with the great Jose Silva. I appreciate your time, man.
Thank you, brother.
Condolences to you and your family. Keep up the good work. Peace.
The Never Quit Podcast, sponsored and hosted by Quotes Jungle, with your host, Quote.